Hi everyone, we're just going to be starting in just a little while, so hang in. If you want, you can enter in our chat box and let us know where you're sitting, where you're spending your time tonight. The chat should be in the right-hand lower corner of your screen. We'll be back in a moment. Hi, and welcome to Digital Savvy Parenting, Cyberbullying, Gaming, and Other Dangers, presented by Your Teen Media and Verizon. Today is the third of a four-part webinar series on technology and teenagers. I'm Jennifer Cohn, and I'm moderating tonight's discussion. And on the end of the couch, we've got Sue Borison. She's the editor of Your Teen Media, and she's going to be our audience liaison tonight. She's going to monitor your questions and comments and make sure that we hear them as part of the discussion. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Before we begin, we've got a few housekeeping tips. So please participate in our chat section. In the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you can see your chat box. We really love to have your comments and your questions, and Sue will interject them throughout the discussion tonight. If you encounter any technical difficulties, we have a couple of suggestions. One, switch to Chrome browser. That can really help. Two, make sure you turn off all other applications on your device and make sure that no one else is streaming anything. It will really help keep your bandwidth wide and get the webinar get through to you. And don't worry, because if you get disconnected,
get a chance to sing.
Right.
Okay, I've got sound now.
No one would care.
We have sound.
You got from the same thing, from the same device. So
Is it working then?
yeah.
Are we up and running?
Yeah.
I'm not getting any bars on the camera. All right.
Okay, we think
Oh,
we're
it's
sound
coming.
again?
It must be coming.
It is.
No,
Actually,
I have
there's
no
a red
sound.
light.
No sound.
You have a delay. Just wait.
1, 2, 2.
Or maybe somebody that's.
Okay, we're hoping we got it figured
They're all
out.
saying no.
We're gonna see.
I
have
Oh,
Okay.
I can juggle. Oh,
Okay.
there it is.
1, 2.
Does anybody have anything to juggle?
Got it now. Wait,
Okay.
you should get it now.
Sound.
1, 2. 2, check, check,
All right.
check.
All right.
You're live.
I think we're back live and we've got sound. All right, we're gonna move ahead. Also joining us as our third panelist is Dr. Michael Rich. He's an MD and he holds also a master's in public health. He works with the Center on Media and Child Health at Children's Hospital in Boston. And you can check out Michael on Twitter at @themediatrician or online at askthemediatrician.org, where he answers questions on the physical and mental health of children and teenagers. I want to thank you all for being here with us tonight. We're going to keep our fingers crossed that we keep the sound for the rest of the webinar. So all three of our panelists have incredible expertise with teenagers and the role parents need to play in helping teenagers develop and make good decisions about their behaviors. I know I speak for many parents that the rapid advances in technology have created many parenting moments that are beyond what we experienced when we were teenagers. And oftentimes, I don't think we're really prepared to deal with some of the things that go on now. There's three main topics that we want to talk about tonight: gaming, cyberbullying, and pornography. We wanted to start off with something a little bit different than what we've done with our other webinars, and we really wanted to have each of you offer a key piece of advice. So, you know, if the parents listening in tonight took away one thing that they could do that's very practical, hands-on, that maybe they're not doing today, what would that be? So I just want each of you to think about that and to respond. So, Debbie, I'm going to ask you first.
Okay, I'm first throwing myself on the fire here. I'm going to try and condense a sort of complicated idea into something sort of short. I think that the most practical thing is a process-oriented thing. The most important thing I feel in addressing any issue with children, and particularly kids in the middle of developmental change, which every adolescent is to keep a dialogue going. Not an easy thing to do with teenagers, but the whole idea of control, whether parents are controlling the child or the child is grabbing control, might miss the point. The goal of raising children and of developing adults is helping them develop self-regulation, self-control, and self-discipline. So the tact is to try to develop that self so that it isn't an adversarial process and it isn't all who's controlling whom. So that's my short form, and now I think we're passing it on to Bill.
Yep.
What I'd like to start with is a context generally about bringing adolescents up. Our school psychologist, Mark McConville, once said something that I come back to often, and he said, one of the main purposes of adolescence is to move from the loving orbit of the family to a caring orbit outside the family. And if you're going to do that, it's going to end with leaving home. So very hard for the parents who have had a loving child, they want their attention, they'd like to be home, to someone who now wants autonomy and distance. But the issue then is going from managing your child to having your child develop self-management. So when you're in the situations anywhere, but also online, that's the continuum you're looking at. Is this a moment when you can create latitude, allow someone to move towards self-management, or is it a time to manage for a while? That's the key sensibility I go with. So when you take that and ask questions about when should you be gaming, how do you control gaming, all of that's going to be in that continuum.
Great. And Michael, what do you want to add? Maybe now he doesn't have sound. Okay, so we're going to, we'll move on. So the way that we wanted to set up tonight is we're going to focus on the three topics of gaming, pornography, and cyberbullying. Each of our panelists is going to speak on a specific topic, The other panelists are going to be able to add some additional comments, and then obviously we'll ask some questions, whether they come from me or they come from you based on what you're sending and putting into the chat box. So the first topic that we're going to discuss is with Bill. And Bill, we want to understand a little bit more about gaming. And, for me, I was really interested in knowing, is this something that really boys do more than girls, or, what's going on, and what are the trends, and then what are some practical tips or advice that you can offer?
Most recent research suggests that girls more and more game, almost as much as boys. The two distinctions are boys play more violent games, and they play games longer. And some of that comes from how boy development works. When I think of boys generally, there's a quote I remember from Luann Gressendine. That's a book called The Male Brain. She talks about boys growing up, and she says, testosterone or beer, a 9-year-old has the equivalent of 1 cup of beer in it per day, and a 15-year-old has the equivalent of 2 gallons. And so in that huge growth process, you are hormonally drunk as a 15-year-old boy. You have more hormones in you than more testosterone than at any other time in your life. With that, in the pleasure centers of the brain, the boy's brain is almost numb. And so gaming is a huge pleasure for him. If it's hard for him to sit in class because it's understimulating, games are what boys do at that age. They're violent, they're competitive, they're loud, think hard rock. And so that huge stimulation helps them, is hugely attractive to them at that time. It can become catnip. And so within the managing of it, I'd say a few things. One, for boys and girls, whenever you get a new Xbox, set the ground rules. Whenever you get a new game, set the ground rules. Just make up a time to set the new ground rules. And some people go so far as to have a contract on this. And finish with this question: is this fair? And once you can get them to say, yes, we've made an arrangement that's fair, then you follow it in the house. Now, easy steps you can take are by having that one computer or that one Xbox in a public place, announce the times, and make those transitions go by quickly. The moment when you say you have to let go, get past that. There's a habit with some parents to be very democratic in their parenting. That might not be a moment to be democratic.
Debbie, anything you want to add?
Well, very, very interesting, and I think right on target. The only thing I would add is that I think you're so right that the minute they get the device is the time to discuss what's going to happen with it. I think it's always helpful to try and have buy-in so that the dialogue is, what do we both think are fair rules? So that when they violate the rules, and they will, you can say, wait a minute, let's go back to what we talked about and why you thought this was a good idea and why you think this is good buy-in, so that it becomes more collaborative. But I agree with Bill that you can't have it be all democratic. It's an oligarchy. And as parents, it's a relief when they can't stop themselves to have somebody help stop them as much as they protest against it.
Michael, is there anything that you want to add? Or do we still not have him?
Do we not have Michael?
All right, you know what? We'll move on, and we'll hope that you guys can connect Michael soon. So one of the things that I was wondering is having a contract, writing it up formally, having people sign it, having your kids sign it, reviewing it on a regular basis. Is that a worthwhile technique or not?
Oh, you go first.
I think it depends on how cooperative your child is with your family rules. I don't think you want to begin there. You start by saying, is this fair? And after a while, if you have enough arguments so that you don't enjoy each other's company, so it's becoming tense, and then the question is, what can we do to make this more satisfactory for ourselves? Why don't we sit down and write a contract together? Why don't we agree on and give the child some amount of choice? It sounds democratic, it's not necessarily democratic, but it's actually the creating of that document that creates ongoing conversation. And then say, and let's revisit this document in 4 weeks and see if it's still working. Make it a living document as you move forward.
Okay.
Oh, Michael's on
Michael?
with us again? Michael, you there?
Oh, we can hear.
We can't hear you.
Okay, so now we can't hear him. They're going to keep on working. Okay,
Let
you
me
guys
just-
work on it and we'll keep on trying.
Let me just add on to what Bill was saying, because I think the idea of it being a living document, that it's a tool for discussion. It's not the endpoint. And if you recognize it as a tool, then you can use it in creative and organic ways in the discussion. It does objectify the discussion more. It puts it outside of the relationship a little bit, because the relationship can be heated for reasons that Bill was outlining before and that I was talking about. It's a developmental phase where the relationship between adolescent and parent isn't always neutral. And I think the idea of a contract is to try and neutralize it. But I think that the idea of talking about it first and that the contract is a tool to use if it doesn't work in the discussion is a great idea.
What about, is there any opportunity about, should you play the games with your kids? And does that help at all so that you understand it and, it's an opportunity to see what they're doing, or is that not a place to go?
I think you want to know the world your children are in, both online, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Know what that game is, just to know what environment they're in. Mm-hmm. Playing with it will have a small cool factor for a little while for your child. Mm-hmm. Just standing beside him and having a different kind of relationship side by side, in the same way that pastorally playing catch or something is. You're just spending enjoyable time together, not only to test their world, but maybe it's just fun to enjoy something your child enjoys doing.
So the idea would not be to monitor, but to engage. I think, and you can speak to this maybe better than I, that the gaming has a social interaction piece of it that can be very peer related. It is the way kids play together mm-hmm. in ways where they don't have to call it playing exactly. So sometimes having a parent in on it sort of takes it away from the peer to something that's too much within the family. But I think, you talk to your kid and see if they want to do it. If they want to do it with you, great. And if they say no, you probably want to listen to them in terms of the playing part. I think if they say no and you need to know what they're doing, then you can say, look, I just need to know what you're doing. I need to know something about this game. So it's sort of above board mm-hmm. rather mm-hmm. than, manipulative.
Okay.
Is he on?
Okay. Michael, I don't know if you've been able to hear anything that we've been talking about, but we've been discussing gaming. And I don't know if there's any particular advice or comment that you would want to add.
I have been able to hear you. Unfortunately, I think the switching on the muting got reversed. But the one thing I would add to this is that the research that we and others have done has indicated that gaming and technology in general are one of the best educational technologies yet developed. And we need to recognize, first of all, that they can be harnessed and used to teach and to expand our children's world, but also that our children are learning what they do when they play these games. And if we want them to learn to steal cars, that's a good thing, and they should play Grand Theft Auto. If we want them to learn to solve problems or build cities, they might want to play a different game like SimCity. So I think that we need to be very mindful of the fact that kids are building their concept of the world and the way they should behave in it all the time, and that when we condone them or encourage them to play these games, we are saying to them, this is the way the world is and this is what you need to learn. Now, there was a burst of research in the 70s around violent media that was looking at whether this provided a catharsis for them so they didn't have to have true violence in their lives. And basically that theory got completely debunked with that research, because what it showed is that they became desensitized to violence rather than released it.
You're picking up in our chat box.
Well, Tracy had a good suggestion that she thinks it's a great idea to include the child when you're coming up with the rules, and that when they're away from the game, in the midst of the game, they're in the middle of something that's all-consuming, but when they move away from the game, they can be reasonable and be part of that contract or whatever your family decides to do.
And I just add to that, and Tracy's point is very well taken, you're trying to help your children be somewhat self-reflective on what's going on. So if you can't talk to them in the middle of the game, just like you can't talk to a kid in the middle of a temper tantrum, when they're not there, they're not there. But when they're available, to have them reflect on what's going on. And that includes when you've made rules and they've broken the rules. you want to get their thought about it. And there's something that adolescents do, which is they hand off a piece of the conflict to the parents and to the grown-up. So you're the yes person and they're the no person, or you're the no person and they're the yes person. What we're really trying to do is hand it back to them so that they have some conflict within themselves, so they can decide what they want to do with it. That's where the growth, both mental and emotional, comes in.
One last question on gaming. Is it something where they can actually get addicted to it, like where they need it and they have to play it, and it's really part of their day every day?
Yes is the answer. One of the things you want to have that do is be reasonable within a balanced life. And so is it starting to influence other parts of your life, your homework, your social life, your sleep? If it starts to be outsized and influence moments that are healthy and interactive elsewhere, that's the time when you want to check on your child, and that's when you might start putting some scaffolding in place for him or her. But yes, you want to watch that. How many hours are they playing? Are they playing in their room? Sometimes you won't allow them in the room, but you have to watch that because it can come out of balance.
So I'm going to jump in with what Esther had to say, and she brings up, I think, a point that many parents have to deal with, which is that our kids are playing with kids in other places, and that game never ends. So that artificial time that you call dinner can erupt into such a problem for that child because they're so immersed in that moment. What do you do?
Particularly with
Michael,
playing games. Games such as World of Warcraft, EverQuest, League of Legends, where there are players 24/7 around the world, literally, all on different time zones. I think that I have trouble with the term addiction because it is stigmatizing and it's actually not completely accurate. And it's additionally problematic because the DSM-5, the current Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, does not recognize it as a diagnosis. But I am getting 1 to 2 new referrals every week for some variation on internet or gaming addiction. And what it often is that they are self-soothing or self-medicating from an underlying issue of anxiety, depression, social isolation, etc. And I think that one of the things we have to recognize is that this may not be monolithic, that the person who's on porn sites all the time is different than the kids who's on gaming sites all the time from the person who's on social media all the time. So I think we need to look at it in a non-pejorative way, but in a way that tries to understand exactly what the disruption is in this child's life, how they are disabled by it, and what we can address to really fill that need. And I am a little concerned about this idea of self-reflection, because one of the things that the research is showing us is that increased time in these virtual environments where they are mostly reacting to other things that are going on does not allow them to develop reflective thinking, as well as other pursuits like reading or being out in nature or playing physical sports. And so one of the things that we're starting to see is that capability of self-reflection is not learned or practiced in these environments.
I agree. I think the whole point is to get self-reflection, you actually have to remove from that stimulus. But I also would like to contextualize what we're talking about here in the developmental thing, the hormonal wash of adolescence. Behavior has meaning. All behavior is some form of communication, and I think what Michael was saying is understand the idiosyncrasies of your child. What are they trying to communicate? What's going on globally in their life? Not to reduce it to one variable. But one of the characteristics of adolescence is a can't stop feeling. They really do have a hard time regulating themselves. Not because they're bad and not because they have some kind of pathological problem, but this is part of the developmental stage. So all these things that we're talking about have a seductive side to them. if they're warding off some depressive state, if they're anxious about a girlfriend or school. The seductive piece is how much do they have to keep doing to ward off a feeling on one hand, and how much pleasure do they get from continuing to do an activity. So you want to sort of put it in the context of development, that you know, kids engage in some of these things. It isn't necessarily a sign of intense pathology. It might be the sign of an intense difficulty at the developmental stage.
Good framing. Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic. And so we're going to have Debbie speak a little bit about pornography, and within that also sexting, because we know that's really becoming very prevalent and becoming an issue sometimes with adolescents. So why don't you just frame the issue for us and share some advice, trends, perspectives that you have.
Well, I've started to contextualize it already, which is that can't stop feeling more than anything comes up around sexual interests in adolescence. Not a surprise to any of us who were adolescents. This is part of growth and development. The problem is what's available to children now and how much control or lack of control there is around these things. Clearly, you can see anything on the internet. The kids are probably far more sophisticated than any of us are about accessing these things. So the idea that, you know, you can just make a set of rules and then guard that and make sure they follow the rules is probably not the way you want to go, and it's probably not going to get you where you want to go. I think the idea of pornography, which I think is, it sounds so sleazy and it sounds so bad, it's a very seductive thing for kids because it's secret excitement, and adolescence is full of secret excitement. But I think it's more helpful to certainly help children understand that there are things out there that can be very overwhelming to them, even though they're very curious. So again, I'm talking about a dialogue that will lead maybe to, you know, rules. Certainly you do want to know what your kids are doing online, all the things that you can read about in all the magazines. But none of it works unless it's in the context of trying to understand who they are and what their interests are. So the conversation that everybody gets curious about these things, that they're not deviant because they're interested in these things, can actually interfere with the drive to go and do those things. Furthermore, the self-reflective piece is, how does it make you feel when you see too much? Now that's a conversation that I think needs to start way before adolescence. You take kids to any Disney movie and there is something way too scary for young kids. It floods the mechanism. So the whole idea of recognizing what the mechanism can stand in your child and what they're exposed to needs to start under 5 all the way through. For those of you that are now have adolescents that saw every Disney movie, and we all had those, it's talking about the feeling of having too much and then they need a discharge mechanism. And the discharge mechanism will be all kinds of activities, including maybe searching for porn. So again, I'm talking about a dialogue. The sexting, you know, I think people want to scare their kids straight and say, you know what, if it gets caught by the school, you're going to get, you know, and listen, knowing what's reality is very important. But in general, scaring kids straight sort of ups the ante at times with kids. You know, you say no, they say how much no, how much no, how much no, and you're off and running. So I think the idea of helping them understand that the kids that sext, and it's always helpful to talk about other kids opposed to them. You know, some kids are interested in this, some kids do that. Is to say, what are they trying to have here? Are they, you know, are they running away with impulses? Are they showing something private? You know, what are the consequences? But that it isn't. It ends up not being exciting in a good way. It ends up being exciting in a way that doesn't feel so good. And then again, to put it in the context of what are the consequences in the real world. So that's the context.
Michael, I know from our conversation before the webinar that you had also some interesting perspectives and thoughts in regards to the pornography and the sexting and what's going on and the trends that are coming.
Yes. First of all, I think that we have to be careful not to mix them as the same thing, even though they both have to do with sex. Pornography and sexting are very different activities. And I have actually seen a few young men who came to me because they had spent their adolescence with pornography and were now in college and had their first opportunity to really develop romantic relationships and did not know how to do it because they had never had to, respond to their sexual tension by actually going out and having to talk to a girl. And so in some ways we run the risk of them being stunted in the natural drive that helps us overcome the fear of intimacy and the fear of connecting with someone in a real way. In addition to the fact that pornography objectifies women, it objectifies the sex act itself and is completely disconnected from any kind of love, caring, trust, and intimacy. Sexting, on the other hand, I think we have to recognize is in adults as well as in children another sexual behavior. It is part of the sexual behaviors we have available to us now with the digital environment. People have been sending pictures of each other, of themselves to each other for years through earlier technologies. This is not new, and in fact what we're seeing with kids is that they progress into it as part of their sexual maturation and sexual experimentation. One kid said to me, sexting is the new second base. So I think that instead of turning it into a child pornography felony, which is what many jurisdictions actually do, and some even make them registered sex offenders afterwards, I think we have to understand that this is part of the palette of human sexuality that has now been opened up by the digital capabilities.
Bill, anything you want to add?
In a recent article in the New York Times, Lisa D'Amour had, who was on an earlier webinar here, had a piece on how to talk to your child about pornography. And she said some points that our school says. When you have a sensitive topic with a student, with your child, it helps to be in the car and not looking face to face. And she makes a comic point. It helps to be close to home and say, I'd prefer you not do this because it's loveless, it's dark, it's unrelated to relationships. She also makes the point, you can be stimulated by things you disapprove of. And so if building relationships, having contact and intimacy in relationships, that's where you want to go. You want to build the habits of that and not the objectification we talked about.
I think that the idea of talking when they're not looking at you, particularly around personal and embarrassing topics, is a great idea, actually.
For them and for us.
Yes, and it's very hard once your children actually get their driver's licenses. You actually lose the opportunity. I think the relationship part of this, which both Mike and Bill are speaking to, is so incredibly important. And that means there's a values piece of this in terms of how you see women or how you see men, how you see yourself, whether the part is for the whole. I think part of the problem in sexting is all sexting isn't the same. I've had kids send pornographic pictures of themselves to other people, and it was on the momentary impulse of something breaking through. And I think Michael's point about not having this criminalized is so important because adolescents are full of impulse control problems. And the kids that were watching pornography in high school that couldn't form relationships until college, they grew out of it. They did develop beyond it. They might have needed help to do it. Many times, though, for kids that are afraid of relationships, this is the draw. So the idea of talking about how to have relationships, what's good about a relationship, and what one should disapprove of and does disapprove of inside them, not just us, them. They do have a moral sense. They do have a sense of what feels right and wrong. Again, it's part of the conversation as you're driving in the car and not looking at them.
One of the things I thought about with this is a lot of the TV shows that I watch on cable, which, are pretty sexually explicit now and, probably could be considered pornography in some sense. I almost feel a little guilty that I'm watching those shows and I'm telling my kids, and some of them are, my children who are 16, 17, 18, not to watch them, or I know they're watching them because they can, and it's very hard for me I can say I don't think it's appropriate. How do you manage that when you're watching these shows and, even enjoying them in some aspect and you want to see them? How do you manage that?
Well, I'll go ahead. Michael, did you want to say something?
I think you bring up a really important point, not just around sexually charged shows, but about virtually all of our behaviors in the digital space. And that is, I often say to parents, kids hear about 1% of what you say, but 100% of what you do. And I think that if we expect them to behave in certain ways, we need to model those behaviors for them, even if it means giving up our salacious bodice rippers, and behave in ways that we want them to move into. Otherwise, we're giving a double standard there. We're telling them it's okay for me, but it's not okay for you. And I think that we have to be very careful about that, just the way we can't be saying, get off your video game while we're doing the crackberry prayer, So I think we have to bring our own behaviors in line with what we want for our children.
Well, and I think being a parent means delaying a lot of gratification in all different kinds of ways.
Oh, yes.
And they certainly take in everything you do. I keep thinking of you're telling your children to communicate while you're talking on the cell phone to somebody else. And there's a lot of being in the same room with somebody and not being with somebody. I think, I'm old enough that I remember when TV came into this world and, the worry about how much TV everybody was going to watch. Well, you can't just define it by the activity. You have to define it by the activity you're doing. Watching TV with somebody and discussing the show is great. It's just you can't be discussing shows that you feel are not appropriate for your children. You're giving a mixed message. It's okay, but it's not okay. So there's a lot of boundary keeping that's very important.
Everyone's familiar with the notion of a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and one is tempting you and one is encouraging your right conduct. There's a Cherokee myth of a wolf that tells you all the things you shouldn't be: envious, petty, mean, salacious. And there's one that tells you who you should be, who leads you to your best self. And in that myth, the boy who's told that story says, well, which one do I listen to? And the answer he's given is the one that you feed. And so just creating habits that have you move towards your best self, or joining communities where you can be your best self, whether that's a sports team, an after-school club. Be involved in something that's going to move you affirmatively with people who are going to encourage you in activities that are good and move you in a community sense towards capable activity, relationships, health. Those are the things you want to move to. So it's not what are we doing online, it's what are we doing globally in our whole lives. What are your kids involved with over a long period of time?
And some of the questions are reflecting that. One of the questions, and I'm sorry I don't remember who asked it, was peer pressure. Now, all the kids have this particular game, all the kids are doing this. Well, that's not a new conversation. But what would you say to that? What do you tell your kid? How do you handle it when it is so much a part of their social life and you're left out because your parents said no to that game?
Well, there are different ways of defining yourself, aren't there? There's a way of defining yourself by what everybody else is doing so that you can fit in, which usually comes from feeling insecure. And then there are ways of defining yourself by developing some of your own muscle, feeding the right part of it. And I think that the dialogue around peer pressure starts very young and goes all the way through college. And the dialogue, it seems to me, is, being like everybody else isn't going to make you feel who you are. And just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you should do it, is that old line from the 1950s. I think instead of saying you shouldn't do it, it shouldn't be a right or wrong, it should be, this isn't consistent with who you are as a person. And you'll feel better when you're consistent with who you are as a person, opposed to letting somebody else define you. Adolescents actually like that. They actually like feeling the muscle of this is who I am. Kids also, even in adolescence, like it if it comes from the right way, not in a pejorative way, but in a supportive way, saying, in our family, that isn't how we operate, particularly around value systems. Everybody is leaving out this kid because, in our family, we're not unkind. And that's a community that they really do feel connected to more than the peers deep inside of them.
Robert Evans in the book Family Matters says that good families have three things. The first is nurturing, and it's just, I love you, Mr. Rogers. I love you just the way you are. You don't have to do anything. I just love you. The second is structure, which is here we do this. On Saturday we go to temple. On Sunday we go to church. We eat as a family. We do this. And the last is latitude, and that's that management to self-management. And in the second one on structure, you can give your child an out on a sleepover by saying, you can call me and say, I did not allow you to do this anymore. You can be the out and the hard guy so that the child can be in the peer group and not look silly or not up to snuff by saying, my parents won't allow me to do this. I'm not going to take this risk. I need to leave this situation. The other is finding peer groups that are affirmative. Again, back to teams or activities that you're going to find.
I know I use that a lot with my children to say, call us, and we would know what they were communicating, and we would come and get them or whatever, take them out of the situation without embarrassing them. I think it's a really good technique and tool. Okay.
I think another thing to do that is really consistent with adolescent development is that they are moving in this stage of life from a child who is both nurtured and protected and restricted in some ways or ordered by parents to an autonomous adult. And they are making this very difficult passage. One of the key elements to this, and one that they love, is moving from a follower to a leader. And one of the best ways to be a leader is not to follow what everybody else is doing, but to strike out on your own path. And if you can frame it that way, rather than saying, don't do this, we don't do this, you shouldn't do this, but to say, why don't you show a different path? Why don't you march to the beat of the different drummer? Because that's the kind of thing that's going to get you in leadership positions to get into college and to, strike out into the world.
I'd like to say something that's actually addressing all of you parents of what it feels like to be the parent of an adolescent. And particularly when you read all the media and you hear all the terrible things that are going on, you get very scared. And I think to remember that adolescence has been a developmental phase since humankind has begun, and parents haven't known exactly what to do. Becoming a parent, you're not handed a handbook right when they're born. So a lot of this is sort of trial and error, knowing your own kid, but I think being too scared is not going to be helpful to you. Kids are going to make mistakes, and if they don't make mistakes, they're not going to learn anything. We're trying to keep the mistakes within a range, so that it's not such a terrible mistake that it follows them for their life or that it's traumatic. But and I think Michael's word of latitude, or was it Bill's word of latitude, comes to mind, where there needs to be room for them to find out who they are. And one way they find out who they are is being somebody that they actually end up not liking so much. Who they are as an adolescent is not a predictor of who they're going to be as an adult. And that is the hardest thing. They sound reasonable. They talk like we do. They do activities. They can drive. They can read. They can argue us to death. But that isn't necessarily how they're going to turn out as adults. And if you all remember your own adolescence and some of the things you did, you might realize that you're actually not the same way you were when you were 16. So to sort of calm down the parental anxiety which we all feel, just remember it is a journey, and they are going to fall down. It's what they decide when they get up that matters.
Good perspective. Really good perspective.
It's a good perspective now that my kids are grown up. I don't think I had that perspective when they were adolescents.
There's a line I sometimes use, which is adolescence is an emotional roller coaster. Please don't get in the car with your child.
That's great.
Stand at the side and with a mature perspective, watch what's going on.
Good. All right, so we're going to move on to our last topic, which is cyberbullying. And we're going to ask Michael to actually share some of his thoughts, perspective, trends, and information on cyberbullying. And one thing I really would like, Michael, is a formal definition. What constitutes cyberbullying? What are the ingredients that make it cyberbullying?
Cyberbullying is, by definition, the use of digital media to threaten, harass, slander, coerce, or ostracize others. It's using email, texting, Instagram postings, videos, etc., to embarrass, to lessen, and as with traditional bullying, it is the systematic violence or threat of violence toward a perceived weaker person. Now, there are some interesting differences between cyberbullying and bullying as we traditionally know it. The first being that bullying is the systematic hurting of a weaker person by a stronger person. So it was the big kid who gave wedgies to the little kid in the playground. It was the cool girls being mean to the uncool girls and ostracizing them. Online, that power differential is less clear. And so one of the interesting things that is different about cyberbullying is that we have a huge overlap between victims and bullies. It is not as clear a role, and there is the rise of what we're calling the victim bully, the person who is victimized and turns around and victimizes others, or even the same people who victimize them by taking on a different persona online. The prevalence of this is widely variable depending on the definition. If you talk to young people, they will say, oh, a lot of it is just drama, teen drama. The problem with that is that it is just drama until one person gets hurt by it. And because they have this lack of impulse control, that hurt can end up with really tragic circumstances, up to and including suicide. So I think that we have to realize that their concept of what is okay, what is teasing, what is drama, and what we think is okay between kids may vary a lot.
In our conversation, nobody has brought up, something so serious in regards to the life of a child. And so is this really just focused on cyberbullying, or does, the risk to their safety and their health and, actually going so far to kill themselves, does it reach into any of the other topics that we've spoken about, or is it limited or really focused on this issue with cyberbullying?
I think that the more generalized application of this is that two of the most dangerous states for any human being, but particularly adolescents, are humiliation and helplessness. And cyberbullying brings up those in big form. And I think when Michael was describing how the victim becomes the victimizer in some way, that is one of the ways kids handle things. When they have a feeling they don't want, they go from being the one that was done to being the one that does to. It's sort of hot potato. I don't want to feel this. I'm going to make you feel this. And around humiliation, there's a tremendous need to humiliate somebody else if you felt humiliated. So one of the approaches to this in terms of, I suppose the eternal question is, which is worse for you as a parent, to think of your child as a bully or to think of your child as the victim of being bullied? Neither is a good position. And both, again, I'm always saying talk about things, so you're probably sick of what I'm saying. But I do think that to talk about why somebody cyberbullies, it is to make somebody else feel something that they don't want to feel. It's just like the popular crowd, but sort of on steroids. The popular crowd, if you're in the popular crowd, you're popular. The whole point of the popular crowd is somebody has to be unpopular. So you have to make somebody else feel unpopular. So it's who's in, who's out. And that's a more benign, perhaps, form of the cyberbullying. So the intervention point with your child is always, first of all, if they're victimized, to say somebody is feeling very bad and getting you to feel bad instead of they're feeling bad, which actually empowers somebody to say, oh, wait a minute, this is that the other person has a problem, it isn't that I have a problem. And the person that's bullying is, you're feeling bad about something because you're the one that's feeling this that you're saying about them, and it can be an aha moment. The problem is, when it's cyberbullying, you don't have those intervention moments. It's secret, it's under the radar for parents, so it brings up the question of monitoring. I'd say one of the things you always want to do is watch when there's a change in your kid's behavior. When they stop sleeping, stop eating, grades start falling, or they're shutting themselves in a room, crying, or they get hyperactive, anything that's an alteration. Is, as in the sense that behavior has meaning, is a sign something's going on and can be a sign that some kind of bullying is going on.
And I would include in that spending even more time online because
Yes.
they become hypervigilant, as any victim does. And one interesting statistic is that 58% of kids who've been victims of cyberbullying never mentioned it to an adult. So 3 out of 5 never mentioned it to adult, not because they don't think we care or they don't think we can talk about it, but because they are afraid that we will reflexively take away their access, take away their device, take away their Facebook page, etc. And that is their last line of surveillance and last line of defense, or offense if they are striking out against others. And so I think that we have to be very careful about cyberbullying also because unlike bullying, it doesn't have a place where it occurs. So many schools, quite frankly, say, this is not our problem. It's not happening on school property, right? Even though it's happening in my community, because they don't know how to manage it, and they just don't want one more thing on their plate. And the other piece of that is you can leave the playground or the gym or the locker room where you're being bullied. You cannot get away from cyberbullying. It's always there, and if you're not paying attention to it, it's going to probably be worse in your mind, not better. So I think that what we have to recognize and actually encourage our kids to become leaders to step up and recognize is that the solution is not traditional policing and punishing of perpetrators. It is changing the entire culture of that school and changing it from one where the 3 components of bullying, the bully, the victim, and the bystanders, are all victims whose lives are all diminished by fear and anxiousness and anger, and move to a place where they are realizing that everything they do against another is happening against their society and ultimately against themselves.
That speaks to Bill's point about community, by the way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Changes in middle school health curriculums to address this kind of issue, or just campaigns within the school of what is right conduct. What does it mean to be a bystander is a huge question in this, because of the invisibility of it. And then telling the kids what are the steps you should do, because you don't want to look like a rat, you don't want to look like a cheat, but you do want to tell some parent, some adult in the world who can step in and start navigating this for kids. It's part of your community, you just have to address it. It's about right conduct.
Sue, did you want to add any of the comments that you're
I
seeing?
think that a stream of conversation going on among the viewers is this sense that I think for all 3 of the topics that you would want to take away the mechanism that's causing the problem. So the comments are a little counterintuitive because your kid is suffering from cyberbullying. Wouldn't the natural thing be to say, put away the computer and let's do something else, let's go to a movie? So it's like how do you balance what seems to be the obvious to us as parents?
The device doesn't cause the problem. We cause the problem. As Pogo said, we have met the enemy and he is us. This is behavior that has happened since we crawled out of the caves, but it's existing in a new environment, a digital environment, which the kids understand better than we do, or at least they navigate in it better than we do. But we all have to learn how to evolve into good citizens in that space. So the device doesn't do it, and it's too easy to sort of take sort of say, oh, it's the smartphone, it's the laptop, it's the iPad that did it. It was me that did it, or it was me that allowed it to happen as a bystander. And I think that if we can step up and take responsibility and to use these tools, and that's all they are, is tools, wisely and in ways that make us better and to be the better angels of our nature, as Abraham Lincoln said, then we can master this. But if we walk away from it, we're just being Luddites, and it's not going to go away.
Teenagers today are teenagers online, especially until they can drive. Being 15 is the worst moment because you feel like you're an emerging adult, a young adult, and mom and dad have to be in the car. It's awful. So you want the anonymity of being online, and to not have your device is to be unplugged from your peer group. It feels like you're ostracized. So talking about how to manage it well, like managing a car, because once you get to that, what are the hours, who can be in the car with you, when do you go? That's the hard part of parenting, about how much trust, how much structure do you put in. Being present for your child so that you see the changes in personality, sleep, friendships, those are what make being the parent of an adolescent just hard.
I think the comments are saying what really are the practical hands-on things to do, and it's very complicated to answer that because there isn't just one thing to do, and there's a lot not to do. I'd say that if to unplug, when Michael said the problem isn't the device, it's the culture, it's the what's happening piece of it. I think it's, again, the dialogue piece with your child. If they're having to be hypervigilant to see, is somebody talking about me now online? I have to look. I'm only going to feel good if they're not, and I'm going to feel terrible if they are. And there's that sort of can't stop, need to know thing. I think if the parent can know what's going on, they can help a kid feel a little more contained about it, saying, look, this isn't making you feel good. I'm not telling you not to look, but let's look together. Let's talk about what's going on. Where you get to be part of the process, that'll make you feel better. But I think the solution to this is not just a behavioral intervention solution. The solution about this is an approach. There's a wonderful program, Facing History, Facing Ourselves. They talk about people being upstanders rather than bystanders. And that has a tremendous appeal to the better side of our nature. But it provides a community for doing that, and it provides a historical context for people that do it. Adolescents love to identify with something that isn't their parents necessarily in a way that they know it is, something outside of them, something bigger than them. And if you can put in the moral piece of it without it being moralistic, they really can respond incredibly well to it. So you're not helpless if you have this be a long-term approach. I think you want to end up unplugging the computer because it makes you feel like you're doing something and you're active opposed to being helpless. So it's sort of redefining how your activity looks with your kid, and it's a longer-term adventure.
Okay. So what I thought we could do is just try to wrap up and have maybe each of you, we've spoken about a lot of really serious topics. Again, I want people to be able to walk away with some practical things, and we've had a lot of it interwoven. You started offering some advice at the very beginning, and I want to ask you again to offer, what's that piece of advice based on what we've spoken about, some of the comments that you've heard, our discussion, that again you would want to reinforce or add to the parents and the things that they can do and add to their toolkit.
First.
Debbie, you can go.
I get to go first. Ladies first. Okay. I think two concepts to take away. One is the relationship with your child, that the relationship is what's going to carry you through. Knowing your child, even when in adolescence they seem like they don't know themselves, they're secret from themselves and they're secret from us, they still need you and you're still in a relationship with them, even if it has a different form. And I think that the other piece that's so helpful for the parent is to somehow contain your own anxiety, so that whatever you're doing with your child is actually something you're prepared to do, that they're prepared for, that it's not coming from a dark place. It's actually coming from the more teaching parental place.
Bill?
Our former Dean of Students, Margie Mason, used to say, it's a parent's job to put yourself out of business. That
become obsolete.
You need to become obsolete. You want to see your adolescent as an emerging adult, and you're helping him or her develop the habits of mind, habits and attitudes to move forward in that way. What's hard is adolescents want you to leave them alone. They want autonomy, and so they are rude, mean, snipey, and you simply have to let it go by. The notion is, you're out of control when they throw you a fastball and you say, you think that was fast? Watch this. And then you need to bring in the other spouse to take over for a little while. There's turbulence, but it's moving towards adulthood, and just have faith in them. They don't have faith in their future self. You do, and you do need to.
Michael, what would you add?
Well, I completely agree with the idea that we have to put our emotion aside and remember, what we want for our children, and to have the long view of them. And also to remember that parenting is an art, not a science. and we are going to make mistakes, and we need to forgive ourselves for those mistakes and move on, and not get caught up in the emotion directed toward ourselves for saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. When it comes to, you know, the digital world and the digital devices, I think we have to remember that these are tools. And these are tools to be introduced, as you were saying, with the video gaming before my mic was turned on, that you introduce to the kids and you negotiate exactly how they're going to be used, for what they're going to be used, what those limits should be that you set with them. I completely agree with that. And you do it before you engage on it. Just like when you negotiate for a job, you negotiate with your kid for this new stage. And you also negotiate what the consequences are when one of those rules gets overstepped. And remember that they are tools to introduce them to the child when the child actually needs the tools to do something, not because everybody else has them. And to be used in directed, mindful ways with an eye on the outcome of interest, how we want to come out on the other side of it. And also to recognize that you use them when you need them and you turn them off and do other things, because ultimately what we owe our children more than anything is a rich and diverse menu of experience.
Great. Thank you. You guys were just incredible tonight. I really enjoyed and was really honored to be part of the discussion tonight. It was wonderful. So I want to also thank Verizon for presenting your Teen Technology Series. We're really grateful to them for their commitment to educating parents and teams and teens and their commitment to safeguarding our families. And again, I want to remind everyone, on the Verizon website, they have wonderful parent tools that you should access, that you should look at. Also, take advantage of Michael's website. It's wonderful. I looked at it today, and it's terrific. And lastly, I just want to ask you to plan on joining us for the 4th webinar, which is going to take place on December 11th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to be discussing the role of technology in the college admissions process. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Do you wish your son was studying rather than playing on his phone? Answer, My Verizon. You're in control with Verizon Family.